Well, for more than 10 years of my life, I have been fighting censorship, political censorship, by government bureaucrats and politicians. I really started my battle when I was charged with 2 counts of promoting hate speech under the Alberta Human Rights Act for publishing the Danish cartoons of Mohammed. I was dragged through a 900-day process. They finally dropped the charges, but I learned how governments can squelch free speech. That did not prepare me, though, for how corporations censor you, at least with governments, even with deeply unfair organizations like a Human Rights Commission, which is more akin to a kangaroo court than a real court. At least there was some notice. At least you knew who the accuser was. At least you had some chance to meet the charge against you, even if it was tilted and the procedure was biased. Even though there was some tilted activist judge, they at least had some pretense of being neutral before they made the decision. And finally, you could appeal. All those things are vague remnants of the rule of law that we expect from our real courts. But none of those things I just listed are there when a corporation censors you. When, for example, as happened to us last week, a DNS server, that's a domain name system server, a deep part of the internet infrastructure, just cut us off on 24 hours notice and said, we're kicking you out and hope you find some other place to have your internet. It knocked us off the web for about 4 days in half the world. There was no appeal, there was no notice. We don't know who fingered us or what their accusations were. We had no chance to answer the charges, let alone appeal. And I've come to the unhappy conclusion that government censorship, though odious, at least comes in its own name and you can meet it, whereas corporate censorship comes immediately, stealthily, and cryptically, and really, who are you going to call? Joining us now via Skype is our friend Pamela Geller, who is a blogger at PamelaGeller.com, but much more than that, she's a leader for freedom and fighting against the Islamification of America, and she heads the American Freedom Defense Initiative. I'm talking about my friend, Pamela Geller. Pamela, how are you?
Hey, Ezra, thank you so much for having me and discussing this critical issue.
Well, you were targeted by basically the leading internet bank. I mean, a lot of banks are online. Everyone does online banking. But PayPal, I think it was the first online native bank. It was the bank made for the internet, for ordinary folks to do transactions. It's ubiquitous. And it's a way that bloggers and people with a YouTube page can get paid. It's how we run our company. It's how you raise funds for your good work. Tell me what happened one day when PayPal decided that instead of being a utility or a neutral thing like a bank machine, it was going to play political censor.
Well, I have been on PayPal since 2000. And while, yes, there are other payment providers, I will tell you that in a way, PayPal is a bit of a monopoly. It's very simple. It's very easy. Everyone knows it. It's how all eBay transactions were done for a very long time. Replacing PayPal was difficult. We spent the whole day, and of course now, after having, I don't want to jump, too quickly, but after having been reinstated, after announcing on Twitter and getting literally tens of thousands of retweets, it became a public relations nightmare for PayPal. Of course, I'm using other payment providers. I will not accept money. I will accept money from PayPal if people want to donate, because I will not cede this field. People say this because, as for example, Facebook has, blocked my news feed. My page alone has over 1 million followers, not including all my groups, which brings it to roughly 2 million. People say, oh, go on this and go on that. No, you cannot cede the field. This is how people communicate in this day and age. Frankly, the left is using Charlottesville to move in for the kill and crush anyone who dissents. This is how the PayPal suspension began. There was a reporter for a magazine, an uber left, like quote unquote think tank, Lauren Kushner at ProPublica, who wrote me with a series of questions, all framed as I am a hate group, and is it right that tech giants do business with hate group? And according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, here we go again. The Southern Poverty Law Center's hate group list was an annoyance for years. But now the left is using it as a weapon to shut down conservatives. And no one questions the SPLC's legitimacy. I mean, even the mayor of Boston called the SPLC to ask them what to do about the free speech rally, which, by the way, was a terrible moment for America. You had tens of thousands of Americans coming out in Boston to stand against freedom of speech, against a handful of people of all different races and creeds who actually asked the Black Lives Matter leader to speak at their rally, and they were crushed, and everyone was rejoicing about what happened in Boston. It was horrible. Charlottesville is, as I think it was Dr. Jack Wheeler called it, the Reichstag moment for the left here in America, as if these Nazis are the real threat to freedom and security. The idea that these Nazis, who have been around forever, they're a handful of stragglers. Look, we defeated that enemy in the last century. Who's bigifying the Nazis, the five Nazis? The left. They're creating a boogeyman out of whole cloth, Ezra.
Yeah. Well, that's what I've always said. I remember when there was some march for the Daily Stormer in Montana, and I thought, that's not going to happen. And all the media was getting excited about it, and there was going to be hundreds of people, thousands of people. I said, baloney. And I remember telling folks here at the office, it's not going to happen because it's one guy in a blog. And sure enough, it didn't happen. This Charlottesville protest, there were a few hundred people carrying tiki torches through Charlottesville at night, and it was a terrifying and menacing sight, although it was a nonviolent sight until the next day, the murder. But here's my point. Months of national PR, and the best you can muster in a country of more than 300 million is literally one person in a million showing up in Charlottesville. It is so microscopic. But why was it given such national publicity? Because the left needs their boogeyman to be real. They need to say the violent threat in America is the right, not Islam, not the Black Bloc, Antifa, Black Lives Matter, Occupy Wall Street types that have been rioting all throughout Obama's administration. In a way, that awful terror, I'm going to call it a terrorist attack, that murder in Charlottesville, that was what was lusted for by the left, because that is their sole proof point in their mind that the violent threat in America is from the right, as if alt-right white nationalism is true right-wing. Anyway, you're so right that was the excuse for everything. That was the excuse that they used to knock us off the internet for 4 days too.
Right. And the organizer, as you know, was an OWS, an Occupy Wall Street activist, and was an Obama supporter. And the Nazi movement was a left-wing movement. The National Socialist Workers' Parties. It's like the Nazis versus the communists. It's really almost left versus left. But the idea that the Southern Poverty Law Center is the arbiter, who decides that they are trustworthy? Yeah. Who watches the watchmen? What really upsets me is that there's an enormous amount of power. I think the most amount of power, even in recent history, in the hands of so few people. Yeah. Enormous power. And when we've seen the U.S. government use antitrust laws to take down tobacco companies, to take down Standard Oil, we've seen this. I believe that those companies didn't have the power or the money that a Mark Zuckerberg has. Yeah. And I don't know if it's through legislation or if it's through antitrust laws. Look, this is how we communicate. Facebook has blocked my feed. Google AdSense has suspended doing business with me. I do not have Google Ads anymore because I am a quote-unquote dangerous site. Truth is dangerous now. It's Orwellian. Yeah. YouTube has demonetized my videos. It's not just me. This is a systematic takedown of the freedom of speech. Ezra, yeah. Shouting into the wilderness is not freedom of speech. Yeah. Talking to yourself is not freedom of speech. Yeah. This is, Facebook is a bulletin board for us to communicate with the people that we love or that we work with or that respect our ideas. You cannot shut this down. We cannot cede this field. I mean, this is the greatest threat, more so than jihadism or communism or leftism, totalitarianism. Look, in this country, in my country, the First Amendment, it's the First Amendment. It's not the 8th, it's not the 2nd, it's not the 10th, it's the first, because it was the most important freedom that we have. The foundation of any free society is contingent upon the freedom of speech. And what we're seeing now is a very, very dangerous trend. Boston, I mean, Boston was the first time that I said, this is a game changer.
Yeah.
Tens of thousands of people coming out against the freedom of speech.
Yeah, marching against freedom of speech. I've never heard of that in America before en masse, and that's what was terrifying about it. You know, the analogy I used the other day with us, that when our DNS server was changed on one day's notice, what that is that's what, when you type in a word in the internet, like PamelaGeller.com or therebel.media, it's what changes those human recognizable words and English letters into numbers that then routes you from your computer to our service. So it's like a phone number. I think that's the best analogy. So it would be like our phone company contacted us and said, hey, you've had the same phone number for years, everyone knows it. We've heard what you've said on that phone number and we don't like it. So we, the phone company, are making a judgment about what you say on your phone. We're giving you 24 hours notice. We're taking back your phone number. So yeah, better get cracking, talking to all your friends. Find a new phone number and tell all your friends about it, and you've got, 23 hours and 55 minutes left. That's what happened to us. And no appeal, no information to rebut. What would happen if the power company did that to your house and said, we don't like what you're using our electricity for? If the sewer company said, we don't like, at what point do you say you are a public utility, you have more power over people's lives than actually most politicians, you're not using it neutrally, and like you point out, Pamela, much more abusively than even J.D. Rockefeller or Carnegie or the other robber barons did. I think that the Silicon Valley robber barons today have far more control over your life than the oil and steel and coal robber barons did 100+ years ago, and by far more power over your life than the average politician. Last word to you.
Listen, enormous power is in the control of almost uniformly left-wing corporate managers. It's very scary. I'd rather not have electricity than not have the freedom of the mind, not have the freedom of expression, not have freedom of conscience. It's much deadlier. And look, the U.S. government broke up AT&T, broke up, you use an analogy of the phone. It's exactly what it is. It is a form of communication. And if the government could do it with the American Telegraph and Telephone Company, break up Ma Bell, they certainly should do it with a Facebook. Mm-hmm. I mean, look, even Google, and I don't know if you've experienced this, but all of my posts, 15 years, 40,000 posts have been scrubbed from Google search. It is a systematic crushing of the First Amendment. And honestly, most people don't even know that this is happening, but they're going to wake up one day, Ezra, and they're not going to recognize the country that they live in.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. If you're gone from the internet, it's like that phrase gaslighting. Well, were you really ever there? And how can you check to know if you were there? And how can we find out to hear what happened to you if you're blocked? That's what was so terrifying. We've had a bumpy week here at the Rebel. We've gotten through it, and we're going to be stronger than ever. But the most scary moment was, if we are taken down from the internet, how do we even tell people what happened to us? And what, I mean, it's an existential threat. And now the computers are moving into every area of life, and artificial intelligence. Now these devices in your home that you can speak to with voice commands and have sort of an AI, artificial intelligence. Even fridges are artificial intelligence now. What if embedded in those is a form of politics and censorship? And I know that sounds futuristic and dystopian, but we're there already. I remember the New York Times 2 years ago carried an essay by Eric Schmidt of Google, which owns YouTube, and said he envisions a spell check, but for feelings and hate and ideas. So not just correcting your spelling. You know when you type something and it auto-corrects your spelling? Imagine you type a word and it auto-corrects your whole idea. That's what Google's working on. That's terrifying. I know we've gone on very long here, but this is a very important subject, Pamela. You are always welcome here on The Rebel. I want to keep in touch with you because you are the canary in the coal mine here. And we have to let people know that they're coming for Pamela Geller today. They come for The Rebel. It's only a matter of time before, quote, mere conservatives, moderate conservatives, have the same sort of censorship. We need to fight in the first ditch, not the last.
Absolutely. Look, all of my work is in defense of freedom of speech and freedom of conscience and equality for all people before the law. The claim that I operate a hate group, again, this is a vicious smear. Who decides what's hate? Who decides what's good and what's forbidden? And I will tell you, this eerily evokes the circumstances that preceded the rise of the Nazis in the 1930s. I mean, what do you think? The Germans just woke up one day and started murdering millions of people en masse? No, first you demonize, you dehumanize people, then you shut down the freedom of speech. This is eerily evocative of that.
Well, a lot to think about. Pamela Geller, thank you so much for joining us. I know you're traveling. I appreciate you making the time. We'll certainly keep an eye peeled on this, and we'll keep squawking as long as we have some voice. We managed to survive the last week. We're not dead yet, I'll tell you that. We got a lot more fight left in us, and it's clear you do too, Pamela. Thanks for everything. Hey, if you like that, sign up for my show every day. Click on the screen to subscribe.